Welcome and thank you all for joining us on this webinar on conflict, militarism, and securitization of the virus, feminist peace and states accountability. My name is Anthony Kahale. I am the Masculinities Technical Advisor at Abad Resource Center for Gender Equality in Lebanon. And it is my extreme pleasure to be moderating this session for you all today with wonderful feminist leaders from the MENA region to discuss first their experiences of militarization and the impact of that on their work in Syria, Libya, and Yemen. First, perhaps just a brief, superficial, not in-depth definition of militarized masculinity. Militarized masculinity is simply an accentuated form of patriarchal masculinity. It has, it values and places above all else obedience to a hierarchy of power. And power is valued more than any other characteristic in these type of societies. It strives for dominance and superiority over others. It values assertiveness politically and socially, and aggression in the face of any contestation to their superiority or their dominance. Rather than look for solutions that build power with and harmony with other groups and other factions and other countries, rather militarized societies and societies that strive on militarized masculinity strives for and hopes for power over other individuals. The ideal is to create a society of soldier citizens or warriors of the state whose deaths are honored as ultimate sacrifice for the power of that state. Obviously, militarized masculinities, like all things in the studies of masculinities, there are very different forms, and it changes and it shapes and evolves over time based on the context and quite transparently based on the propaganda needed to mask the shadow of the actual intentions of that militarized state. Recently, we have seen shifts towards a more tender but tough iteration of militarized masculinities, as well as still seeing a very dictatorial approach to what that means. And today, we are very lucky to have three leading feminist leaders in the MENA region to discuss the iterations of militarized masculinities that impact their work in the countries they are working in. Hopefully, over the scope of this webinar, we hope to talk about how the use of the COVID-19 pandemic in these societies were used to increase militarism and control and surveillance over people in the state and very specifically over feminists and other civil rights activists who are attempting to do work in those countries. And we also would like to discuss access to healthcare and vital services needed to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and how those responses were utilized for political, economic, and geopolitical interests to strengthen the authoritarian and oppressive policies of these militarized states. So without further ado, and to not make the sin of mansplaining at the beginning of a WILPF webinar, I would like to introduce our three esteemed panelists today. First, I would like to introduce Ms. Rasha Jarhum, who is a South Yemeni, who co-founded and is the director of the Peace Track Initiative, hosted at the Human Rights and Research and Education Center at Ottawa University. Through the Peace Track Initiative work, Rasha has been supporting inclusion of women in the peace process, including sending women's independent delegations to UN-led and KSA-led peace processes, leading Track 2 diplomacy consultations with women's groups, as well as working to protect women human rights defenders in Yemen. She has led efforts to draft the Yemen National Agenda for Women, Peace and Security, and led civil society consultations for supporting and the development of a national action plan for the implementation of United States Security Council 1325 in Yemen. Rasha, thank you so much for being with us. We also have Ms. Salma Kahale, a Syrian feminist and social justice activist with over 15 years of experience in youth engagement, women's rights, and transitional justice. She has worked in several countries in the Middle East, developing and implementing national policies on child protection and youth mobilization. For the last 6 years, Salma has been the executive director of Dawlaty, leading its work on inclusive justice, civic engagement, and campaigning with families and survivors of detention and disappearance. Salma holds a master's degree in gender development and globalization from the London School of Economics. Salma, it is a great pleasure to have you with us as well. And last but not least, we have Ms. Rida and Tubuly, who founded the Together We Build It initiative, a nonprofit organization that looks to engage young people and women in politics in 2011 when it was founded. She founded the 1325 Network, a collective of civil society organization that looks to implement United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, a resolution that focused on women, peace, and security. She also co-authored the first civil report on the 1325 United Nations Security Council, which was launched in New York in 2014. She also worked to empower women in the democratic process, and she has encountered women to be more involved with decision-making and supporting them in the running for office. And she was named as BBC 100 Woman in 2019, and it is our extreme pleasure to have her with us as well today. So if we may start, perhaps we can start with Rasha. Rasha, Yemen has been spiraling in war for the past 7 years, and although there's an armed embargo on Yemen, the country is still facing increased masculine militarization. Can you tell us about the impact on your work on women's rights specifically in Yemen?
Thank you, Anthony, for your introduction and having me today. Yemen, my country, has always been a militarized nation. Even before this war, 60% of the households were owned, or 60% of the household owned private arms, and Yemen ranked among the top 10 countries who owns private firearms. The military depots and military camps are situated inside the cities in highly populated areas since even before the war, and continues to until today. As women, we have continuously sounded the alarm and called for cities to be demilitarized. However, there were never serious efforts to do disarmament or demilitarization of the cities. Today, with the war, the situation has exaggerated and magnified. Arms transfer continue to flow into the country, regardless of the arms embargo that was imposed by the UN Security Council in 2015, which, as a consequence, led to a nationwide blockade. We still see armed groups who are empowered more to have weapons. Weapons are simply sold on Facebook, and many schools have turned into military locations for armed groups. There is increased use of mines everywhere. It's laid up in agricultural fields, in the coastal areas, even in the sea, which obstructs the livelihoods of people. Farmers cannot farm, and fisher persons cannot fish, and impacting food insecurity. Air bombardment campaigns and indiscriminate shelling have destroyed the very limited infrastructure that we had in Yemen already. Yemen was already poor, and all of this destruction have led to inaccessibility to the basic life-saving services. Now, 7 years into this conflict, we're only seeing increased escalation of hostilities and increased empowerment of armed groups, including the Houthis, who have never been more equipped and powerful and well-armed than today. The impact of this increased masculine militarization is catastrophic, especially on women, because they are impacted disproportionately. The violations and abuses against women in Yemen have reached a level that we have never seen before in Yemen's history. Women who are killed in their homes, they are killed in schools, they are killed in in the markets, they're killed in hospitals. Even the tribal values that we had that considered targeting women as a big shame are no longer respected. Women peacemakers, women humanitarian workers, women who are political activists and leaders are arbitrarily detained, tortured, sexually abused, and repeatedly raped by armed groups as a weapon of war. The Peace Track Initiative, my organization, we have supported at least 30 Yemeni women human rights defender and peace builder with protection grants to support their resilience, especially after their release. We also engaged with international mechanisms for accountability to document these violations and abuses. And our efforts in documenting these violations and abuses materialized in including the sexual and gender-based violence and child recruitment in the sanction list that was developed by the UN Security Council last year. This graphic situation that women are facing in Yemen does not mean that Yemeni women are passive victims of this war. Doing this work, I have been privileged to work with brave Yemeni women who risk their lives on a daily basis, leading the efforts to peace building in their communities. Women who are tiptoeing on mines to bring food to the trapped families in the fire lines. Women who are negotiating with armed groups for local ceasefires to ensure evacuating families. Women who are facilitating and demonstrating regularly to release arbitrarily detained persons enduring harassment from armed groups. To conclude my answer for your question, it is important to recognize that Yemeni women are not waiting for a prince on a white horse to come and save them. They are doing the hard work and facing multi-dimensional and unimaginable challenges, and they only need their voices to be, their loud voices to be heard and respected. And I will end here.
Thank you so much, Rasha, for your work and for that humbling recollection of what the reality is for women living in Yemen right now. We'll come back to you a little bit later to hear more about what is being done in your work and what can be done better. Thank you so much. Now, if maybe we can turn to Salma. Salma, would it be possible for you to expand on this concept of militarized masculinities and secularization, specifically within the COVID-19 pandemic and how it's affecting your work? And I apologize, just bringing attention to what was written in the chat. For anyone who would like a simultaneous Arabic translation, it can be found on the French translation channel. Sorry about that. Salma, please let us know
Sure.
how this looks in Syria from your experience.
Before I say anything else, please excuse any noise as my neighbors are doing construction. So the realities of working from home. I think, in Syria, the militarized masculinity and a militarized and securitized approach has been the way in which the government has dealt with, citizens' demands and the conflict as, and it is clear that has neither ended the conflict nor brought an end to the war, nor has it brought an end to or has actually addressed citizens' concerns. But they continue to use this approach, an approach that is, using the same mentality and the same tools of masculinized, militarized masculinity to address COVID. And just as it didn't work before, it hasn't worked and is not working now, either to control the pandemic or to address its effects. And that is on several fronts. One, whether you're looking at the way in which, for instance, they control information, who has access to information, threatening doctors that are sorry, 1 second. I'll try to move. Sorry, threatening doctors so that they don't release information, so much so that they are not able to even share information amongst each other and understand the situation themselves so that they can actually be able to respond to it. So there is, of course, a lot of misinformation about the scope of the pandemic and what's going on, leading to also citizens mistrusting, again, what the government is saying, leading to broader mistrust and people not complying with the measures that have at different times been imposed. You go into, power over the government. The Syrian regime has at different points allowed Syrian civil society, groups on the ground, communities to actually work. Particularly, they have restricted the work of civil society very much, but at some stages, as in response to the conflict, they had to let civil society work. They used, because they could not deal with the humanitarian needs of the communities under their control. They have used the pandemic, while there were many civil society groups or communities that thought, okay, we need to help, we need to support. There's been all these closures. There is no social system to support the most vulnerable. We can respond and support these groups and provide education. Rather than supporting these communities, the government has sought to control them, control who has access to different areas, who's able to move within these areas. And thus, again, rather than, as you were talking about power over, as opposed to the government has sought to control with different civil society groups and communities as a way of trying to enforce measures rather than trying to work with others. And a lot, you come then to the fact that this is not a system that addresses and a worldview that does not address the needs of the most vulnerable. And so putting measures in place that did not take into stopping public transport as a way of, for instance, stopping the ability to, as a way of trying to stop people from moving around and leaving their houses. Well, that affected those that are most vulnerable. That affected the people who are trying to get to the areas where the most vulnerable are. Locking down specific areas that are politically aligned with the opposition or that used to be under opposition control. So further using COVID and restrictions to go after certain areas. And then, of course, not having any way of addressing the needs, and this goes for many different countries in the region, I think, the not having any social systems or supports to support communities and families, individuals that are impacted by the lockdowns, and so again leading to increased mistrust, lack of compliance, ways in which people are, and the exacerbation of the pandemic. And this does not get into, and we can talk about it later, the way in which also the regime continued to use, even in the pandemic, that called for breaking through political or military lines to provide humanitarian support. Regime has done quite the opposite by using water as a weapon of war, denying access to, it wasn't the regime, but the different groups. There was actually the regime and its allies, denying access, restricting access to opposition-held areas, and it's not just the regime here. If you look at the way in which the militarized response was exacerbated through COVID, you look at how Turkey, actually, the Turkish government then didn't, used water as a weapon of war and denied certain areas access to water. The UN and its lack of ability to actually move beyond this, certain models. So then you can look at not just, there was the Syrian regime, its approach that is securitized, but also, this is part of a broader system that is set up in this way with and a mentality in which this regime operates.
Thank you so much, Salma, for relaying to us how different militarized groups actually not only not responding to the people and the needs of the people and the most vulnerable in a time of need of COVID-19, but opportunistically using it to leverage their own power. I definitely look forward to hearing more about that a bit later on. And I would like to thank you and Rasha and Rida and everyone here for making the time to meet us in such difficult circumstances. And we definitely understand all of the things that might be happening in our environment. We're very appreciative of your time. Thank you. Rida, I would love to turn to you now and hear more about your work in Libya and how this militarization and securitization, especially in terms of COVID, is creating multiple faceted problems and obstacles in the face of building feminist peace, which is a large majority of your work in Libya. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you for this kind introduction. Yeah. Actually, I want to start my speech by saying that despite the importance and value of feminist peace remains as like a virtual concept for Libyan women, which is not considered, not implemented in political and peace processes in Libya since 2011. If I want to take you like, and I'm claiming this actually based on my being as a Libyan woman activist, and also based on my experience for 10 years of war. And if I want to take you about what happened during this 10 years of war, so I don't think that even the whole webinar would be enough for me to make you get the whole picture, but I will actually share with you some of the outcomes of these 10 years that will really be considered as challenges and factors that affected women participation and presenting the feminist peace as we wish and as we want as Libyan women. And let me just start by highlighting that, and this is important to mention, is the whole political and peace process in Libya since 2011 is mediated by international community. And when I'm saying international community, I mean that is the United Nations mission support in Libya, and also some member states. And we are now, we passed by almost like 3 transitional period, and we are in our way to enter a 4th transitional period, and this means a lot regarding stability. We have, so this is like international level. If I talk about national level, I would say that we have different actors playing in Libya, which is elected Libyans or elected people who are a part of legislative bodies, which is expired actually, because the last election we had, it was since 2014. But these bodies were, still enrolling Libya because of an agreement called the Khayrat signed in 2015. Anyways, also we have another type of actors, which is the armed groups who are playing a big role as well in Libya. Would you imagine that we have multi-governments? In 2015, we had 3 governments, and now we have 2 governments, dysfunctional, not providing any kind of service. So even what Rasha kindly mentioned, and even Salma, it's all there in Libya. So when they were like mentioning a lot of issues, I was imagining that they are talking about Libya as well. Dysfunctional 2 government competing, by the way, competing governments who are, not able to provide any kind of services. And of course, corruption in a fragile country passing by war for 10 years, corruption became like a behavior. And people might say, what's the relation of corruption to women, feminist peace, or women in general? But it plays a big role, and I will say why. Also, as an outcome of this 10 years, we have been introduced as Libya into a very important thing, which is introduction of informal, and I want to say here, informal tribal and regional quota, which also impacted women, and above all, violation of UN women embargo, which is really impacting Libyans and the status of Libya quite a lot, because women still coming in, the influx of women, mercenaries, etc., is still there. So what's the relation with all this with what I'm claiming about absence of feminist peace, inclusion of women? Because when we talk about feminist peace, it's important. Who brings to the table the human rights mandate and visions? And it's women. If you attend a meeting or a dialogue, political dialogue in Libya, you'll find that men are fighting for power and interest. And the only sector or party or whoever you can call it, whoever sitting on the table talking about human rights is women. And when I say human rights, I don't mean only like women rights, at least the right to have a say. As I said, the last general election was in 2014. So since 2014, we have none of the Libyans, ordinary Libyans, including, of course, women, has anything to do with what's going on right now. So, of course, women is paying the price. Despite that, women are not taking part of this war, are not initiating it, but this is the case. They are paying. They have been kidnapped. They have been killed. They are exposed to violence, all kind. They are living in a miserable situation, a cut of electricity, lack of water, all these kind of things. Difficulty in access to even health system, which is already, collapsed. So we were working all these kind of issues. We tried to raise the alarm that international community is mediating this process. So where is women peace and security agenda? Where is feminist peace? How can we give the chance for women to have a say, since there is no general election? So they should, feminist peace or inclusion of women should be, included or implemented or considered in the process. And this is, of course, big part of our work. If we talk about pandemic, yes, even pandemic has enhanced these difficulties. If you are talking about a country with a multi-government, dysfunctional government, with a collapsed health system, and you have armed everywhere, and you have military groups, in absence of a real military or professional military sector or police, how can you implement policies related to pandemic? It's not easy. And in the same way, in the same time, these military groups, or if I may say hybrid actors, they reconfigured themselves to be able to instrumentalize the situation and the pandemic, and they changed their relations and they changed their actions to be able to get the advantage of the pandemic. And for this reason, if we are talking about women who are not part of the of militias, who are not taking part of the they are not in the high position to take decisions. So all actions related to the pandemic were not related to women. And what I'm really concerned about right now is not only providing the services itself. I'm also concerned about the vaccines. Nowadays, I'm really thinking about how such a failed government, or a dysfunctional government, or the problem of a fragile country like Libya, how even this vaccine, if we got a vaccine, how women, what the situation of women with this regards, because you know, as I said, you don't have a system, and even I'm really concerned even about women themselves, who might even prioritize men, in a sense that men are, you know, the guards or whatever reason is. So, you know, a lot of factors that really can be highlighted, and I can talk more if there's any kind of question or a space in the upcoming time, but I can stop right now for here.
Thank you so much, Rida, and I'm sure from yourself and all the speakers, you have so much to say, and we could listen for hours about the analysis that you have contextually. And thank you for bringing the complexity of that system and how long it's been going for 10 years and where we find ourselves now. And remembering that women are not only included, but often always pay the price for these militaristic endeavors upon the parts of the state. Rasha, if I could return to you again. I know from how long I've known you and how long you've been working in how the peace process and how important the peace process is, and advocating for the need for women's participation and leadership within that peace process. Could you tell us a little bit why it's so challenging to include women in the peace process in Yemen?
Thank you, Anthony. And I just want to say to Rida and Salma, there is a lot that we resonate and there is a lot that we have in common. And hopefully with our work and efforts, we will be able to achieve peace in our countries. So working to support the peace process in Yemen, I heard all types of excuses to exclude women. These excuses usually came from international and national stakeholders who questioned our qualification as women, our agency, our role in the public life, our timing to demand inclusion, saying that it is now war, it's not time for women. All of these reasons are not justifiable and to exclude women who represent half of the society. To us in Yemen, excluding women is very shocking, especially that we had a successful model of the national dialogue when women secured almost 30% of participation after the Arab Spring, the Yemen Spring. This successful model was attributed to four main factors, which are documented in the UN Women Global Study of 1325, published in 2015. And these four factors are the women's movement's strong demands to be included at the time, the national political will, the international pressure, and the UN structured design of the peace or the political process at the time, which imposed a quota to include women. Today, if we reflect on these four elements, we look at the women's movement. As women, Yemeni women movement, feminist movement, we haven't been more organized and coordinated than today. We have the Women's Solidarity Network, which has around 300 women members coming from all political and social and economic backgrounds, working to bring peace to the country in all levels, community, national, and even international. We have been vocal on communicating our needs and priorities to all levels, to all stakeholders, including the UN Security Council. For the second element, which is the international pressure, the UN Security Council resolutions at the beginning of the war had very weak language and almost gender-blind language in them. It wasn't until I briefed the Council in 2018 that the UN Security Council resolution adopted afterwards had very clear language that says and emphasized the importance of meaningfully including women. For the UN structure and design, since 2015, when the war escalated, we have seen that the UN mediation process was excluding women, mainly due to a colonized and patriarchally designed process that is not progressing to meet our aspirations to end the war, that also includes women as a tick box exercise on the sidelines, not really including them in the main table. This lack of international pressure and the hesitation of imposing a quota by the UN envoy gave the national parties and entities an excuse to completely sideline women. And very recently, this was reflected in the formation of the government that was announced without women, making this the first government formation in the last 2 decades of Yemen's history to completely exclude women. Although as women's movement, we have sent out letters, official letters to the president, to the prime minister, to the political parties and entities, to the parliament, demanding women's inclusion and gender prioritization for the government mandate in the coming period, our calls were completely ignored. This is due to the national patriarchy that was entertained by international patriarchy. As we have seen, the majority of international actors involved in the Yemen peace process as sponsors of the peace process welcomed the formation of the government without bothering to condemn women's exclusion. Yemeni women are not sitting helpless, waiting to be included. We don't need an invitation to support our country. We have already created our own peace processes. We led our own peace consultations. We developed initiatives to support the peace process. And all of our initiatives, the majority of were reflected in peace agreements that were drafted and signed by the parties. The Mothers of Abductees Association, who are members of the Women's Solidarity Network, were able to, with their very limited resources and means, as a group of mothers, negotiate the release of more than 940 arbitrarily detained persons, comparing to a UN-led process with a budget of over $36 million, with over 100 experts working to negotiate for the release of prisoners over a span of 2 years, were able to release 1,000 prisoners only. To summarize, investing in Yemeni women is more cost-effective than investing in underperforming multilateral agencies and missions. To end my answer, to conclude as well, the international community should recognize and appreciate and acknowledge women's peace builders' efforts. The systematic exclusion should not be normalized and should not be accepted. Exclusion of women should be criminalized in this century. Women represent half of the society, and we have the right to participate in all the decision making. And we are resorting to national and international accountability mechanisms. And we are submitting official complaints about this exclusion. And we are hoping that these violations will be seriously addressed. I will stop here, Anthony. Thank you.
Rasha, thank you so much. That was so powerful. And thank you so much also for your very critical analysis of even international mechanisms and actors and how much they are indeed actually supporting the women's movement and women's inclusion instead of simply tokenistically or superficially making those commitments. Very powerful. Thank you so much, Rasha. We'll turn to you again in a bit to get more of your wonderful thoughts. Salma, I'd love to turn to you now and follow up on how the actions of the militarized masculine state in Syria has been affecting the peace process and supposed ceasefire, and how that's affected humanitarian access to vital services in Syria.
Well, I mean, again, so much of what Rasha was saying really rings true in the Syrian context, whether you're talking about, what is considered, national and to deal with as a national issue, as in women's inclusion, and then what is open for international intervention or persuasion, or so. Unfortunately, many of the conflicts in the countries we come from are very internationalized conflicts with many different groups involved. But of course, when it comes to issues such as women's inclusion, recognizing who should be part of discussions around peace building, it's always that, no, this is a local issue. They did get to decide, you know, on these issues. And, you know, it's systems that are based on, claim to be based on state sovereignty, that are often very influenced by geopolitics and are often very patriarchal. And, you know, this extends from women's who is included in peace building or in any peace process, to also things such as humanitarian access, you know, and what is prioritized. And again, you know, I wanted to reinforcing what Rasha was saying, in that also in Syria you have groups, women's groups on the ground, such as the women's group in Zabadani, who negotiated, you know, very early in the conflict, negotiated the, you know, to remove arrest warrants from the women from that community, and to even have smaller ceasefires, to actually getting, you know, having women organized as the first movement of families of detainees and putting their demands on the table in a way that hadn't been put forward by any of the political groups that are very much dominated by men. So again, and yet these women and these groups are not recognized as being active, relevant, you know, stakeholders or actors that should be involved in a peace process. They're put as advisors, as a nice to have on the side. I will listen to the women before I go talk to the decision makers, which are the men, you know, and the process, I think, has been, at least in Syria, you know, in the Syrian context, it's been taking women's efforts that are very much trying to be involved in the actual decision making and framing it in an advisory board to the special envoy. It has taken the form also of representation, at least initially, representation on what groups do you represent, what ethnic groups, what political groups do you represent, as opposed to also having women representing themselves or representing a group of, you know, a mobilization of women or a commune. You know, they come, okay, we need someone that represents the regime, someone that represents this, as opposed to also engaging women as the active you know, as the peacemakers and community leaders as they are. And this is, again, you know, in the context of COVID, where, you know, this has been, you know, carried through to how, whether it's women are, or not, you know, what is put on the table. So you have, and I want to speak now about the international system broader than just the political one, but also the humanitarian, where it's also set up very much to deal with states. So you had, with COVID, in areas that are outside of regime control, the inability to provide testing initially testing in areas outside regime control. You know, you have systems that are not set up to deal with and recognize and respond to situations that are not based on this very rigid, you know, state sovereignty and what is considered something that we can intervene in, or whether or not. I mean, I think, you know, there's a lot of echoes to these in these different areas, whether we're talking about, you know, what is discussed, who is at the table, and recognizing what needs to be on the table. And I think it's important that, as you know, that whether it is you know, international stakeholders, the UN, and peace, you know, those who are engaged in developing peace processes, to really broaden the scope of what counts as, you know, of who is engaged and how we engage them, and to really value the different experiences and the real experiences that women have in peace building and in engaging and representing their communities on the ground. Yeah, and we'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Salma. I mean, you say so much so well, and just hearing you, you can tell there's so much still to say, and we wish we had more time for that. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us right now. And again, I'm seeing a lot of these connections, despite women being the peacemakers on the ground and doing the actual work. if their participation is included, it's not meaningful. And that's the real point. It's more instrumentalized to be representatives of one group or another and chosen in that way. Thank you for highlighting that. And we look forward to hearing more from you in the time we have with you today. Thank you, Salma. Rida, I'd like to turn to you now and building on the challenge that you spoke about when you first started speaking about your Together We Build It movement. What do you see as the way forward in working with true grassroots-informed and impactful, meaningful women's inclusion in the way forward, moving towards feminist peace in Libya?
Thank you, Anthony. I want to say once more that when I was like listening to Rasha, I mean, I was like imagining if she's sorry, speaking about Libya, and of course even Salma, but more specifically Rasha, is you know what? It's about who is there, because if you are talking about a problem and you want to solve this problem, so you need the right diagnosis for this problem. And as I said before, and I always regret to say it, always that unfortunately I want to mention as well international community. Why I'm saying this? I'm saying this just simply because the process in Libya is like this. International community, UN is mediating the process. They have the roadmaps and they got the approval from Security Council and they implement it. And since it is implemented, okay, whatever the result is, our national authorities or Libyan men, you know, base and build everything based on that. So if you don't have women, you don't have women. So who has the power in Libya? Either the people who are the politician, and they are related as well to the armed parties or groups, or armed groups themselves. Of course, we are doing a lot. We are fighting and we will still fight. We have done a lot as even Together We Build It. We worked on you know, women inclusion since 2011. We are working on women, peace and security agenda since 2012. And we are consulting, we are running studies, we are, you know, forming networks and coalitions. And of course, the impact is very important and very positive. But also, it is this very important issue, which is who's there, who participates in track one, if there's women or not, it is very important. You know, we have a Khairat agreement in 2015, and the Presidential Council emerged from this agreement with 9 men without a single woman. You know what does it mean? It means an effort affected on the government, on a high-level position, level positions, decision making, and this is the real problem. And if you talk about, if you like discuss with international community who is mediating the process, I'm talking about who is mediating the process. One of the issues they mention is society. They can't convince me that society playing a role or societal norms, because we have, I mean, the woman has the right to be educated since 1951. The woman has the right to vote since 1963, 10 years before Switzerland. We have all the international agreements have been ratified during Gaddafi's regime. We have used to have a military school and policy school for women. So it's not about society. If we have political stability and we have rational governments, the Libyan society can be changed and adapting, you know, everything is that can be in the benefit of the society. But the issue is that since the international community is not including women, there will be no women. This is the reality. If we didn't have women in the first election in 2012, you know, we wouldn't have been able to have women right now, even if with these limited numbers. So I think that it's very important to work on two things, which is a long term and a short term. Unfortunately, the short term is very related to international community, because if they don't include women, there will be no women. If they don't play the model role for Libyan men and for the national authorities, there will be no women there. This is very important to be understood. The other thing is that we hear from international community a lot of issues which is not real. For example, I mentioned earlier something, I called it informal, tribal and regional quota. This has been emphasized by international community. And they are saying as if tribes are playing a big role in Libya. And this is not true. If you are, if you consider the tribe as a key player, we wouldn't have been in this chaos for 10 years now. But the power is in hands of people who having weapons, and the people who are, in the head of the power. So if you, like in an agreement or a political dialogue, give the chance for Libyans to divide seats based on regions and tribes, none of the tribes will give a seat for a woman. None of the region will give a seat for a woman, because I'm relating this to what I mentioned earlier, the corruption. A seat mean a lot, mean money, mean interest, mean a lot of things. None of the tribes, none of the region will give a seat to a woman, as I said. So I don't want to take long, but I want to say it's based on each context. I'm not here just saying this to blame certain party or something, or international community. But this is the reality. We don't have the chance only to say this because they are mediating this process. The other thing is that we are not sitting. We are doing a lot. We are doing a great work, even with, for example, in 2018, we managed to include the 3 women in a Palermo conference in a project supported by WILPF. And we have done that by targeting international community. And here you go. Since we are, if we know, as I said, the problem, we will be able to have, the solution for it. So from here, I'm really calling on international community who's working on Libya, and interested in Libya. And I want to emphasize on what Rasha has said earlier. Exclusion of women is not an internal affair. And I really like it that we need to criminalize this as well. I mean, it's important to have women because women are there. Women are paying the price. Women became internally displaced. Women became, refugees. Women face a lot of, violation in human rights. So women should be there. The other issue, which is a long term, especially in the case of Libya, I think that we have now generations who are, brought up in a war environment. And because of lack of government or good governments, or lack or the collapse of the systems like education and health, etc. These young people brought up on no human rights, visions or informations, and they don't even know that my right, ends if I violate your rights. And here, education is very important. We need in Libya, and we need actually the support of international community to push these governments to include peace education and human rights and the curriculum. And through this education, we will be able to smoothly introduce a lot of visions and a lot of issues like women's rights, human rights in general, how to make our culture a culture of peace and democracy. So, as I said, it's I want to stop here, and it's a lot to say, but yeah.
Indeed, thank you so much, Rida. Again, calling upon the international community to do more than simply lip service in talking about advocating for women's leadership in the peace process to do it themselves first and set the pace for the rest. I think that's more than fair. Also a theme that seems to be resonating on many of the speakers, not to hide behind the guise of state sovereignty as an excuse for why you're not advocating for states themselves to include more women within the peace process. Very powerful. Thank you to all of you. Now, as we're reaching the last half hour of our time that we have with all three of you, first I'd like to thank everyone who's watching with us live, and I would like to remind them that they do have the opportunities either on Facebook or here on Zoom to ask questions of the members of our panel based on what you're hearing or based on any inquiries that you have about the situation in their respective countries and their work. And while we take those questions and hear from you, I'd also like to pass by all of you and ask, what are your recommendations for this upcoming phase and for the future in combating the issues that you've been relaying to us over this time? Rasha, can we start with you again?
Thank you, Anthony. I have 4 main recommendations, mainly to the international community. The first one is that there should be a process to reassess arms control policies, international policies and mechanisms, and develop specific measures on how to disarm specifically non-state actors and armed groups. The second is there should be a strong commitment towards pushing women's equal representation and participation. This should be strongly supported and not shied away. Both the international and the national actors should be held accountable for systematic exclusion of women in the peace and political processes in our countries. The third is that women peace builders and human rights defenders must be supported. Their resilience must be supported through long-term sustainable protection grants, because what we have now available is very short-term. It's not adequate for women who come from protracted conflict countries. And the final recommendation is that women-led organizations and feminist organizations need to be unconditionally supported financially. They need to have access to sufficient, flexible and core funding. And I will stop here and mute my cuckoo bird clock, sorry.
Thank you, Rasha, so much. Salma, perhaps we could hear some of your recommendations for the future.
Sure, just quickly. I think that COVID has actually, in different places, in different ways, showed us what models of effective leadership and ineffective leadership there are. And very much so, when you're looking at, not just women leaders, but also feminist leaders, what does it mean to really effectively take a country through crisis and bring people together and on board. And I think it's important, whether you're talking, in the context of COVID or in peace building, is to understand and look at and broaden our concepts of leadership, of who are leaders, what are the skills, what are the experiences that should be taken account when we bring people to a process, and when we, how do we value this kind of leadership and those leaders, particularly those women on the ground that are doing this work, which is the base and the important work of peace building in communities, and so how do we recognize this leadership and bring it into provide access to platforms where the negotiations or the peace process are happening, but also how do we reimagine these processes in order to take different ideas, different approaches to peace building. It's not enough to just say, this is the standard framework, these are the rules, and bringing women into them and say, okay, this is the little box within which you operate. We need to reimagine the whole process. because these processes are not working, you know, and we see that over and over, again, in different conflicts. And again, you know, just to reiterate what Rasha said, we need to support those groups on the ground, you know, through longer term flexible core funding. It's very important, especially with COVID. I think as, you know, these groups have become more vulnerable, have lost funding, and we need to be careful that we ensure that their you know, their ability to survive and to continue the work that they do in communities. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Salma. So important. In fact, that's the very basis of feminist peace, to borrow from Audre Lorde, not using the master's tool. So I love that we need to imagine new pathways forward. That's wonderful. Rida, maybe we can hear also recommendations from your end.
Yeah. Thank you, Anthony. As I said, what I'm saying are based on our Libyan context, and I mentioned before that there are issues which is considered in the peace process and political dialogues that has no roots, real roots on the ground. And for example, once I heard that Libyan women don't like, you know, if externals interfere with their issues, which is really, you know, surprised me and shocked me. So for this reason, I would call on international community and encourage, especially United Nations or the mission to Libya, to establish a consultative body that engage with Libyan women's and youth organizations to make sure that the real situation and visions and the thoughts of people on the ground reach them and they understand the you know, the context well. Also, we call on the national authorities and UNISMIL to adopt a quota. In Libya, without a quota, there will be no women, neither in track 1 or in high level decision-making positions. You know, this is the fact. And also to avoid emphasizing for the informal. And I'm saying informal because it's not, you know, mentioned or, you know, reference to as a quota, but there is a quota, informal quota for tribes and region, which really negatively impacting Libyan women participation. We also consistently, we want also international community and Security Council in specific to enforce a weapon embargo, because we are facing continuous, you know, war because of the you know, the breach of this embargo. So it is very important for Libya and also to take care of countries who are interfering. We need to, I mean, Security Council to take a step against these countries who are interfering. And consequently, there are parties in Libya who are affiliated with these countries, and we have this continuous war. Women, peace and security agenda. We have an amazing women, peace and security agenda adopted by United Nations, but it became like I claimed a virtual feminist peace. It became as well for us in Libya as a virtual women, peace and security agenda. Women are excluded. Women are not protected. We have many women who are peace builders and who are women human rights defenders who were, you know, kidnapped, assassinated, and going through threats and risks, and there's no accountability. And even if it is recognized by international community, it's just like, you know, regretting, feeling sad, feeling sorry. But where is the real women, peace and security agenda that's supposed to be enforced by Security Council? This is very important as well. During the pandemic, we noticed that there were groups, so even because, as I said, there's, you know, dysfunction of governments, competing governments, and lack of providing services. So a lot of groups who were founded even on social media and Facebook to provide, to raise awareness, to provide, support, etc. It was the majority of these groups were established by women. And these women, many of them were trained on women, peace and security agenda. And so I think that the having fundings, and especially core fundings that build this organization who work on women, peace and security is very important. So this is, these are actually the main recommendations that I have for now. I have many, Anthony, but I'll keep the limit to this.
I can imagine. Inshallah, there's even more opportunities to hear from you and from Salma and Rasha, and to take your guidance as feminist leaders on the ground as to what actually needs to change. Several things stood out from everything you all said. I wish I could recapitulate all of them now. Partly is that funding and the core funding to women leaders on the ground and peace builders that is so important. Thinking outside of the box and changing how we look at achieving peace and that issue of feminist peace. And I actually loved how all of you reiterated one of the recommendations is actually implementing 1325 in the spirit that it was written when it was first written, rather than simply apologizing for the lack of an ability to implement it. Very powerful. Thank you all so much. So if we may now take a few questions from the floor, and whoever would like to answer, please just feel free to speak up and share your ideas. The first one comes from Charles Knight, who is with us. Thank you so much, Charles. He wrote in the chat, "Greetings all. I am pleased to be with you this morning. This is Charles Knight. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, USA. I am working on conceiving an approach to disarmament diplomacy that is informed by feminist values, seeking to build trust as a foundational condition of smaller military
I can't hear Anthony, and if I may, I want to respond to Charles' comments. So as the Peace Track Initiative, we are a feminist organization that has positioned itself as a Track 2 partner to the peace process. It was not easy. We were not invited to this space. We claimed that space. We created it and we claimed that space. And the first thing I noticed was that there is indeed a lot of competition between Track 2 actors and Track 1 actors. There is conflicting sometimes relationship. There is and the coordination. There is a lack of coordination generally. But what I also noticed is that when you move, and we came from a background of human rights background, when you move from human rights background towards a peace facilitation background or mediation background, what I noticed is that a lot of Track 2 actors and Track 1 actors compromise on human rights violations and abuses, because they do not want to risk upsetting the negotiating parties who are usually the perpetrators of these human rights violations and abuses. To us, we as you said, Charles, having a feminist values, this was not an option for us to compromise on accountability. What we are pushing for is an accountable peace process. The international mechanisms formed for Yemen to investigate human rights violations must not work in silos apart from the mediation process. It should be all a comprehensive system. And so through our work, for example, on documenting the sexual and gender-based abuse issues and putting it on the sanction list, this does not mean we cannot approach the conflict parties and negotiate with them. And we have been approaching all the conflict parties. We even gave feedback to the peace drafts that they are proposing. So, and we are still respected, we are still trusted. We do have faced challenges. I'm not saying that we are not facing challenges. This is part of the mandate. You will face threats and challenges, but it doesn't mean that when you don't hold the perpetrators accountable, the peace will collapse. It will not. They will still respect you. They will still come and negotiate, and they will still want to work towards peace. So it is very important to have accountability in the peace process.
Hi, everyone. Anthony has dropped off, and I was asked just to jump in if that happened. And so delighted to be joining you. I'm a very poor substitute for Anthony, but I'm Dean Peacock. I work at WILPF. I'm the director of the Confronting Militarized Masculinities initiative, and I've been working on issues related to men and masculinities for a long time. I don't pretend, though, for a moment to be an expert on the places that you're all doing the amazing work you've been describing. And so would encourage participants to jump in with questions. And Rasha, Salma, and Rida, I would encourage you to ask questions of each other as well. You've heard each other talk, and I'm sure have questions. You may even have disagreements, and I think it's a great space just to jump in and share a little nuance, ask questions, and please feel free to ask the difficult questions of each other. I know on panels like this, the temptation often is to, kind of be polite and kind with each other, and kind, of course, important, but do ask the tough questions as well. So can I turn it back to the three of you to ask questions of each other for a moment, and then we'll look to see if anyone comes in with questions. Perhaps Anthony will rejoin us. Over to you, Salma.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but I wanted to just comment and add to what Rasha was saying. I think that, there is this tendency, to, this supposed dichotomy between peace and justice. And I think as feminists, we often say, no, actually, a feminist peace is a just peace. And there's a tendency, and it's interesting when you look at, efforts, some of the efforts to include women in this more tokenistic role. It's often a role that actually strips away that aspect of our organizing. It paints women as peacemakers that don't want any justice or accountability, that do not want to address crimes that happen. And we find that actually, a lot of the women that we work with, especially women and relatives of detainees, there is a very clear awareness and an understanding of the need to address both issues. So it's not it's not extreme in either direction, but there is a very, practical engagement with, yes, we want answers, we want to stop the violence, we want to stop the detention, but we also want, accountability in this way. And so I think it's really important to emphasize that that a feminist peace is a just peace, and including women only to say, come, why don't we all come together in this very stereotypical kind of portrayal of women and peace is really harmful, limiting, and we need to move beyond that in women's participation and inclusion in peace processes.
Great, thank you. So, go ahead, please, Rida.
No, I mean, go ahead, and then I will continue.
I was just curious about what accountability looks like for you. Here in the US, where I've been based for a while, and back in South Africa, where I'm currently joining you from, I think there are lots of interesting conversations about what accountability looks like. And the Black Lives Matter movement certainly has asked, I think, complicated questions of the women's movement around violence and accountability. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what accountability looks like from where you sit.
I can respond to this, at least from our experience. Well, accountability can be reflected on many issues, but let me just say, refer to two issues, for example, say, for example, corruptions. which becomes like a behavior in a country, where these people who are, using the money of the government and for people for their interest, and they are not held accountable for all the chaos they are causing for this interest, for example. Apart from this, let me talk about the accountability related to women, women peace builders and human rights defender. Would you imagine a woman who has been assassinated in the daylight in Benghazi on 9th of November or 10th of November, killed in a high street in Benghazi because she's a human rights defender? She's a woman, a human rights defender and peace builder. And she has been, as I said, assassinated. And the perpetrators or the killers or the assassinators have not been, held accountable. And it's very well known, that in a country like, for example, Libya, where there are, different groups, different parties who are affiliated to certain, sides. I mean, it's very easy even to hold these people accountable. And even though all we heard is, we are sorry, apologize for what happened to this lady. And the issue is that if we are talking about women and inclusion of women, and that women are bringing the mandate of a human rights and the vision of a human rights, it's not only because we are talking about just a human rights, a women's rights, the right to speech, the freedom, it's more than this. It's the right to everything, even having a say. In Libya, as I said, the last election was in 2014. So imagine women who are, not included in the process itself, and have no chance to have a say. And it's not only women, it's even other people, ordinary people in Libya have the right to say for a long time now. So people who are representing them, they shouldn't be there. These bodies are expired already. So talking about human rights or women who are bringing women inclusion is because women are the only sector or the only people who bring these issues to the table. Because men who are sitting there in these negotiations or political negotiation or peace process, they are, they have their own issues to fight and compete on, which is power and seats, which is again related to the corruption I was mentioning earlier, which again related to the continuity of war and the breach of the weapon embargo. So it's not only we don't ask for women to be there or feminist speech just because we are talking about human rights. No, it's far from this.
Great, thank you. Rasha, Salma, anything you want to add? And I think Anthony is back with us. So Anthony, please feel free to jump in as well.
Very quickly. So we managed to include individual sanctions for those who perpetrated sexual and gender-based violence. What's next? This is great. We worked with international accountability mechanisms. The names of these perpetrators are now on the sanction list. What's next? For us, what's next is what's important. We need these perpetrators to be held accountable in terms of prosecution. We want we want reparation for the women who are victims of sexual and gender-based violence. And there hasn't been in Yemen any reparation programs addressing the needs of these women. So accountability for us is a comprehensive, let's say, view into transitional justice. It's not only just prosecution, but it's also reparation and the entire cycle of the transitional justice.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what Rasha and Rida were talking about. I think it's important to look at accountability. Well, justice comprehensively. What does justice mean? What does justice mean to these women? What are the violations that we are taking into account and prioritizing and discussing. So whether it's recognizing gender and sexual and gender-based crimes and prosecuting them, or providing other measures to deal with them and to support the victims. How do we work with the societies? How do we work legally with communities, as well as legally, to address these crimes and their impact on women, and understanding their impact. I think, justice is, looking at it from a feminist perspective is looking at not just how they are gendered, not just having gender sensitive mechanisms, but how, what are the issues that are, what are the issues that have caused this, the underlying, whether it's patriarchal attitudes, the authority, what are these legal and societal issues that have led to these crimes? How do we address them? How do we address the impact more broadly of these crimes as well, beyond just prosecutions? And I think that is, looking at then, how these things are related to rights, citizenship, who's at the table to discuss peace. Those are all very much related to each other and need to be looked at very comprehensively, rather than being in silos and talking about peace alone and then justice separately.
Great, thank you. And I really enjoyed this discussion about the kind of broader vision you all are articulating around what justice means. Anthony is back with us, so I'm going to turn it back to him. Thanks for the brief opportunity to interact with you, and thanks for the excellent panel.
Thank you so much, Dean. And my loss is everyone's gain. Dean has been a leader in masculinities and gender for quite a while now, someone I've learned a lot from. So it's wonderful that he also had the opportunity here to interact with you. And he's a new member of the Women's International League in Freedom, of Peace and Freedom. So thank you so much, Dean, for jumping in. And I apologize to everyone. We're coming to the end of our time together right now. I have thoroughly enjoyed hearing all of your analyses and opinions and visions from your astounding work that you're doing. I think even some of our colleagues were congratulating you on how brave you are and how inspiring all of you are. And even if I just might make an observation that Anthony sitting at his computer and how you interact with one another and you build on each other's power, it's really just an example of that power with feminist approach, building on each other's strengths and solidarity. And I think that it epitomizes what the Women's International League of Peace and Freedom as a network tries to do in connecting strong feminist leaders and the spirit of that critical analysis that it started off with. And I think all of you are really examples of that in the modern day for the longest standing women's organization in the world. To you too, Rasha, I'm not technologically proficient. So, and I would also like to say, as this is a Men Engage platform, thank you to Men Engage. And also, this is a good opportunity for all of us in the Men Engage network who work on men and masculinities to also see how best we can support these feminist movements and how best we can work in our work and continue to gain guidance from you all and how best to do that in working with men and masculinities, and to continue learning from your intersectional feminist approaches that you're all implementing. Thank you all so much. I'd like to leave, again, not with the man having the final word, but rather if we could pass by all of you and get your final thoughts for this panel and for steps in the future as we close off our session. Rasha, can I turn to you again?
Thank you, Anthony. I just want to say that we are in a lot of groups that we are together as Middle East and North Africa women networks, whether as WILPF partners or in our interaction with women from similar context countries. gives us an edge and an advantage in our countries, because we have a better understanding, sometimes more than the men, in terms of the geopolitical situation, and in terms of how to respond and have inspired learning from how to respond to specific complicated issues. I remember at one time we had to get one of the human rights defenders who was released from armed groups' presence, and she was put in house arrest. And I had to go to my Syrian friend and ask her, how did they do to smuggle or extract a woman from a very difficult situation? And she gave us very important tips that we used, and we were successful in extracting the woman human rights defender. So I want to say thank you for this space, and I'm very honored that I'm part of this network. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rasha. Salma, can we hear your final thoughts?
Oh, I don't have I mean, it's just thank you. Thank you for this space and for the opportunity to connect with so many other people. I really appreciated the chance to also, again, make connections and hear from Rasha and Rida, but also to be able to speak to the wider network. And I would hope that, yeah, this is an opportunity to link, the discussion on masculinities to the broader question of peace and, and participation. And yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. The pleasure is ours, and hopefully there will be more of that in the future. Rida, can we hear your final thoughts?
Yes, I just want to start by saying is that when we talk about women's rights or women builders, women human rights defenders, it's not just to raise slogans or to talk about things that theoretical, but it's really women, of course, with men. If we are in a rational, stable country, that can be an added value and can be national wealth. And for this reason, we are talking about women. The other thing is that wherever women is there, I mean, they can be a challenge for people who are not willing to build a country. They can constitute a real challenge and a problem for these people who are just running for seat and interest. And I would just end by saying that I'm honored and humbled to be in this space and together with Rasha. I met Rasha in person 2 years ago, and happy to see her today. I met today Salma, and it's good to learn from each other. And yeah, of course, we are in a place where we are very related, even in the struggles we have. So definitely we can help each other and can support each other, even by knowledge and how to work on issues. I mean, considering the context, yes, but even if we are from not the same country, but almost, there are a lot of things that really relating and connecting each other together. Thanks, Anthony, for the moderation. It's nice moderation. Thanks.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to hear you and listen to you all today, and to learn from you. And hopefully I and other members of the Men Engage network have more opportunities to learn from you and work with you all in the future. Thank you to Men Engage for allowing this platform for us to speak. Thank you for everyone who has been with us today. Just a reminder that the entire session has been recorded and will be shared in Arabic on the WILPF YouTube channel. If anyone would like to watch it again or share the session with those who were unable to be with us today, I want to give a very, very, very heartfelt warm thank you to Rasha, Salma, and Rida. Inshallah, all of your work continues as strongly, and you continue to be a model for us in the future. Thank you, WILPF, and inshallah, we'll see you again soon. Thank you so much.